Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sweating the Small Stuff. Sure, we sweat over the details that make our world richer. I'm your host and personal brain trainer, Cameron Boozer-Jamari, live on camera for the first time because we are coming from we're coming live, not live at all, pre-recorded from a very special studio place. I have some very special guests with me for this final episode of Season 1 of Sweating the Small Stuff. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
It's an awful way to end your season, you know this, right? Just to have us here.
Have some nobodies on.
Yeah.
So, far right.
This is the worst thing you've had some amazing guests on. So for us to finish the season, I feel underprepared.
Well, unfortunately, I can't get
some
a
really
lot
good
of them
guests
back. So we'll see what we do for Season 2. But for Season 1, wrapping up this year-long experiment into what Sweating the Small Stuff really means, we have had a lot of transformation. And one of the biggest transformations is kind of the entire reason I want to be here in the first place. Okay. You see, to my far right, you might not recognize his face, but this is, or was, your personal mind fiend. He has died, and from the ashes of that death came the fiery phoenix that is now Cameron Boozer-Jamari, master and co-founder of, I believe it's called Frameforge Studios, young man.
It is called the Frameforge.
You died?
I died, I guess.
It
Jesus.
was reborn in the fires of a phoenix.
Yeah, it was called Thanksgiving. I ate a bunch of carbs. Now I'm in my cocoon. That's what I'm doing right now. I've chubbed up for the cocoon. But yeah, thank you guys. This is my friend and I, who we'll introduce in a second, started our own little studio. We have a YouTube channel called Frameforge, where we've been uploading a bunch of stuff about the fundamentals of filmmaking and how to make your stuff a little more interesting, how certain genres work, and a bunch of stuff about The Mandalorian. Take it away, Alan.
My name is Alan. I co-do the stuff at Frameforge. I usually do cinematography and whatnot.
He's super good at it.
And I'm happy to be here.
Yes, and so for any of you who are listening to the pure audio version of this, please do go to our YouTube channel, bit.ly/STSS YouTube, because ideally, if we haven't totally messed this up, or I haven't totally messed this up, there will be a video product to go along with this, because I want to come and talk to you guys. Like, I had the good fortune of being in town, and I was like, oh no, I know how we need to end this. I need to get the two guys who I know have been doing an amazing job with the incredible, like, how do you make a film from doing the good lighting, getting your right frame rates, getting your exposure, all the way down to how do you tell a good story. And one of the stories that we've definitely just spent an unrealistic amount of time on lately is Star Wars as a whole, because The Mandalorian dropped, and I needed to come in to talk to you guys because I want to know from a filmmaking standpoint, like, yeah, The Mandalorian is a story that is built in the deep and vast lore of Star Wars. But there was a time pre-1977 where no one knew what a Star War was. And that's what we're here to talk about.
Would that be BSS before Star Wars?
Before Star Wars.
BSW.
BSW, before the Star War. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm here.
It's a deep lore joke. You're welcome.
That's for no one.
That's for no one.
Nowhere.
Do you think George Lucas does that?
He probably makes so many jokes to himself.
He goes like, I was born in 1948 before Star Wars, and this was before all my ideas came through.
Do you think George Lucas stays at Skywalker Ranch because he's afraid of what he created?
Yeah, I would love if he's talking. He's just like, yeah, this is like a THX 1138. Nobody knows it because it was before Star Wars. And Star Wars is the best thing ever.
Little do you guys know that Tesla was my idea.
But we got to bring it back really fast.
Okay.
So.
Jeff Bezos is just practically Guido, and I killed him.
He's actually a CGI element. I made him at
he
ILM.
Sentient. All right. But
he lives in a computer.
Every single joke we just made in the past few minutes is a product of a guy had an idea for a story. A story that a lot of people want to think was much more original than it actually was. And it became a pop culture phenomenon. It became the very first concept of a blockbuster. Prior to this, a movie had never been a singular idea that was so all-enthralling that you could guarantee ticket sales for. And that is exactly what I want to talk to you guys about. Because I feel like a lot of people are happy to point out, and even more people don't know, Star Wars, as much as it is a space western, this concept that it is in space, is distinctly different from science fiction. And even more so, it pulls a lot of story elements from things most of the listeners to this podcast, if not lovers of movies, are very familiar with. So the first place I wanted to start with was, what is Star Wars and why is it not sci-fi?
So we jumped into, this is a companion piece to an episode that we also have on Frameforge where we talk about The Mandalorian episodes 3 and 4, and we get deep into those, but we also talk about this idea that Star Wars is adapting things that weren't meant for the space genre into the space genre. And that's why it has a lot of possibilities that people can go with it, but sometimes it doesn't really do that because it's following the storyline of Han and Leia and Luke and their lineage. And the main differentiation between a sci-fi show, science fiction, and science fantasy, which is Star Wars, is that science fiction in every episode of Star Trek anything, that's pure science fiction where it's just like, it costs this much to do this thing in the world. Here's the physics and here's kind of the logic. Like, logic's huge. Star Wars needs very little of that.
What is the Force?
You told me yesterday that a lightsaber needs to be charged. I didn't believe that. I believed it was an everlasting crystal that would shoot a laser forever if you let it. That's just how Star Wars works, is that you don't need to think about the minutia because of this fantasy element. If you go into the Lord of the Rings, you're probably not thinking, oh, well, he has this many spell slots, and he has to sleep, he has to take a long rest before he can do this. No, you think that, like, Gandalf can do whatever he wants because he's a wizard. Like, that fantasy element is, you can do whatever you want because that's the point of this. We're trying to tell a story that's not bound by physics. And Star Wars can do that with the Western genre, with the samurai genre, samurai movies, Akira Kurosawa kind of stuff. That's the cool thing about The Mandalorian, is that it's Western with a little bit of samurai in there because there's this code that the Mandalorians go by, but also that the first Star Wars movie was like that. We have an episode on Frameforge where we talk about CinemaScope and how the first early Western movies really adopted CinemaScope because it's this widescreen aspect ratio. And with the widescreen, Westerns have really wide landscapes. Star Wars, everybody was using CinemaScope by 1977. So Star Wars takes advantage of that by having really wide landscapes, really wide vistas. And by virtue of that, it is pulling from the Western genre. And we can then,
I'm sorry to interrupt. We
go
gotta
for
pull
it.
back because I want to dive really far into this Western stuff first.
Sure. No.
But for right now, I want to focus on this specific sci-fi versus space fantasy.
But this is what I mean, is that like sci-fi, that by doing that, first you have the Western genre. But then you move forward with like Darth Vader is straight up a samurai. That's samurai armor. You're pulling from all these other disparate places, taking the things that you want to, the little bits that you want to, because it's a fantasy. You can do whatever you want to, and that's why you don't think of two kids sitting with Star Trek toys being like, oh, I find that very illogical, Mr. Sulu. Like, they don't do that. You have two kids playing with Star Wars being like, I got you, Kenobi, force push, and then you throw your thing across the room, because you can. That's a thing you can do. You don't do that with Star Trek, because it doesn't give you that much wonder. As an adult, you think about Star Trek. So.
I think it is because there's not a single glimpse of Earth in Star Wars. Because let's really think about it. Why do we think Lord of the Rings is fantasy? Okay. Well, because there's not a single thing that's bound to Earth in that. You know, we might see some humanoid, people. There's humans in this, but this is not on Earth, and it therefore doesn't abide to Earth rules, right? Okay. In Star Wars, there's places that look like Earth. Episode 4 looks like Florida, but the thing is, and also we also have like human creatures. We have humans in it, but the thing is, we're far from Earth. We don't stay about their rules. All common sense leaves behind. Because guess what? It's removed from it. There's not a single, how can I say this? There's not a single hint that Earth even existed in Star Wars.
It's literally a long, long time ago in a galaxy far away.
Exactly.
Because trying to say before time immemorial, in a place you are not familiar with, and this stuff happens.
And unlike in Star Trek, they always reference Earth. They always say, we are humans. Never in Star Wars do you ever hear the words, I am human. That is a human.
That's fair. Yeah, I don't think I've really heard that.
So that's why I think Star Wars is more of a fantasy, because it has nothing to do with Earth and it's in this realm. That's me. There's no, I don't have the mathematics or like a schematic here saying like, yeah, this is this, but because it's so removed from us, therefore it can do whatever it wants, and that's why I think it has a nice fantasy aspect. Because back in the ye old times, when back in the day, there was no internet, no nothing, and Star Wars was about to come out. Everybody wanted to be a cowboy. Everybody wanted to be an astronaut. Everybody wanted to be this. And then in comes in this movie who's like, hey, kid, do you like everything? Because we're about to give you everything. You're about to go on adventures with princesses and laser pistols. Like
And swords.
In space.
On spaceships.
Yeah.
With like space samurais and space cowboys.
Do you like dogs? Here's a 300-pound one, and it walks in 2 legs. Like, what?
He talks real funny.
It
It's
actively
adorable.
threatens to kill you if you don't play chess or let it win at chess.
Yeah.
He'll rip your arms off.
Yes.
It's great.
So that's why I personally believe that it makes it into a fantasy and not science fiction.
And I think you both will give me an excellent segue into, obviously, the other thing I want to talk about, which is Star Wars cribs a lot from other things around it. Like, I think it's fair to say that it feels wholly original in that this was the first real time, and like this was one of the first movies where like you were like looking at this concept of like space travel and science fiction with air quotes being something painted that like it was more the backdrop and it was the actual focal point. Like a lot of other movies and things that have to do with space travel, the act of space travel is the focal point, not the act of a magical quest to save princesses and fight a giant space death ball and blow it up with your proton torpedoes.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to talk about is like you guys have a fantastic knowledge of some of the places where they cribbed from in order to paint this universe. And I'd like to talk what were some of those sources and how did we end up seeing them play out in at least the original trilogy.
Okay. Well, I mean, especially for episode 4, like alone, you have the 2 warring samurai. You have Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's very chivalrous, and then you have Darth Vader, who's succumbed to greed and everything else, and that he is ruthless and like mean in all of those ways. That you see him, he's just the pinnacle of darkness, literally in a completely pitch black costume, and like that, those images alone strike the audience member of like, okay, good and evil. But then also you see their lightsabers are basically samurai swords, and that alone pitches from that entire genre. But then also you have the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's kind of like this lonely hermit, and that does go from samurai movies, but also is a thing in westerns where you have the lone gunslinger, you have the lone samurai. Literally, one of them is Ichi. No, not Ichi the Killer. There's one that's the blind samurai. I'm trying to remember what his name is. But
Ichi the Killer is a good movie though.
It's really good. But yeah, that's like a thing. Is that there are the lone samurai that goes and helps people, and that's basically what he's doing for Luke. And the cool thing about movies that do something that's really interesting is they use, and I've mentioned this on like 8 other things, is intertextuality. There's a really good like YouTube episode of The Nerd Writer where he talks about it, where you pull things from other stuff so the audience member doesn't need to think about it. So you have Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is the archetype from the samurai. Same thing with Darth Vader. You have Luke Skywalker, who's your heroic journey character, who's your neutral mask. He doesn't have too many interesting things to say because you're supposed to say, hey, he's like me. I'm someone that wants adventure. He wants adventure. Now I can go on this and put myself in their place. When they ask a question, I'm probably asking the same question. Those are all the things that they're pulling from intertextually in that way. You also have the princess. You have the cool smuggler guy in Han Solo. You have the animal character. You have the 2 bumbling idiot characters that are now droids. You have C-3PO and R2-D2. So almost every character that is a character in the beginning trilogy, all of them you could pull from any other movie, and they're that same kind of archetype, and they all work together really well because it's a mashup of them that doesn't feel like a mashup. It doesn't feel like you're pulling them straight from another movie, but it feels like that character now lives in this world.
Okay, so yeah.
How about you, my man?
I think Star Wars does. How can I say this? Star Wars, like you said, Star Wars definitely borrows from a lot of things, but it's hyper original when it comes about its execution. Oh my God! What?
What is with my phone? I set it to quiet. Are you serious?
I didn't catch that.
Are you literally look at that? The volume's off.
You okay?
No, look at it.
I try. I look at
now.
it.
Jesus, he didn't catch that.
So the thing with Star Wars is just like, again, it's super original with like its execution and everything. You know, who like nobody, especially back then, wanted to make a space movie like this.
Yeah.
Because they think, oh, the budget's gonna be like through the dang old roof.
It'd be
right?
so hard.
There's no way. Like, one, it's hard. It's gonna be just god awful. Like, who's gonna relate to this when? I feel like George Lucas was just trying to relate to people's fantasies more than anything. Because let's admit, the story is the quest for good, right? Nothing original from that. It's just its execution was. Also, there's characters for everyone, literally everyone. There is, how can I say this? Like you said, you have your two dumb robots. It's like, oh, there's the comedy in this movie. Great, the comedy is great. Oh, and then like you have Han Solo, right? And it's like, oh, here we have the troubled romance, and like he's a bad boy, and you know, like what's going to happen here? So it has something for those people that really want that. There's just so much for everyone. So that's why I think that because of Star Wars, because of all these things, Lucas, the only thing he did was, hey, I can balance all these genres into something that's cohesive, but I can also do it in an original way that pops out, right? If you Google with the day that Star Wars came out, what other movies came out with it?
Exactly.
It's not even worth talking about. Because Star Wars came out and it did like the coolest new thing. Sorry, the cool old thing in a new way, and here it is.
Yeah,
that's all it did. And like, this is not me crapping on it or anything like that. It's legendary, and I like it, but that's really it.
And something that I swear I'm surprised I haven't brought up yet is I brought up the heroic journey, but the Man with a Thousand Faces, the Joseph Campbell book, that like you said, he literally he's just like, okay, cool. Here's all these archetypes that I need to put in. Now let's pick and choose what we want. Let's pick and choose where they come from. And it's legitimately straight up the exact heroic journey. Verbatim, if you plot it out, it works exactly perfectly.
And you pointed out the
It's in
heroic
space.
journey is kind of like everyone points to Star Wars as being like, this is, if you wanted a like play-by-play textbook example of what the heroic journey looks like for all the beats, this is it. And real fast, can you kind of hit us with the broad strokes of what really is the arc of the heroic journey?
Sure. So
Not the most recent 3 movies.
exactly, or the other recent 3 movies.
Yeah, no, there's
Just
a
the
reason
first 3
that the
movies.
original trilogy stands out and is the quintessential classic compared to the other 2 attempts at Star Wars trilogies. But really, what is those pieces?
Sure. So I don't have it completely memorized. Dan
That's fine.
Harmon has his diet version of it where it's literally only 8 words. And the main idea is that you have your character who is set in their ways. They're where they are, and they might be okay with it. They might not be, but regardless, they're stuck where they are. So if your main character, they're where they are, and then there's a call to action, which means that there is something that's pulling them away from where they've been for their lives. And then either by virtue of them wanting to go out and do it, or by virtue of something pushing them out, they are thrust out of there. They cross what's called the threshold. So in like Lord of the Rings, they literally, Samwise literally says, he's just like, if I take one more step, this is going to be farther than I've ever been. And then Frodo helps him, and it's amazing. And that's the threshold. They go as a choice. Luke gets his family killed on accident, and they get incinerated. And that's his call to...
Was it on accident?
No, it wasn't on accident.
There's
to
like
say, you
18
make-
there's a
theories
theory.
about how that
You make it
happens.
seem like he left the stove on.
No, there's a theory that Boba Fett killed them because he says no. So Darth Vader says no disintegrations, and the only people you ever see that are disintegrated, more or less, are Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. And so it's assumed that like Darth Vader knew about them and was just like, they're my family. And then he sees that they're disintegrated. He's like, well, beans. And then
Oh man, the Force Ghost mom hears about this.
Exactly. So anyway, that was a little tangent
Fun
joke.
tangent.
But that's what I mean. He's thrust out of there, and then now he has his trials to become a hero. Where first off, he meets with the sage. So the sage character is straight up Obi-Wan Kenobi. That person then helps him through the heroic journey, and usually, legitimately, this is in the heroic journey, they usually die. Obi-Wan dies pretty soon in the adventure. Then by trials that the main character goes through what's called the abyss. There's actually a part that's called either the meeting with the father or meeting with the goddess. And the father is Darth Vader. Technically, you don't learn that until the second movie, but it technically is true. As well as the goddess. The goddess character is Leia. He meets with her and is just like, oh hey, and she's just like, you're a little short to be a stormtrooper, haha. And you're like, oh, she's a play on this cool little princess character, which is actually spunky. Anyway, so you have all of that. Those are kind of in the middle. They can be scooched around. But then you have the abyss. The abyss is when your character has to overcome a really hard obstacle or a really hard trial, and then they become the hero. In the first movie, there is kind of that, which is the trench run. There isn't really much other hardship besides that, as well as when he's like shooting the guns on the Millennium Falcon to get out. But then later he has the trial of the tree, where he goes in the tree, he actually fails. That's one of the abyss things. And then after doing all of that, after having all of those adventures, they have their final trial, which is confronting, it's either the meeting with the goddess or confronting the father. Those are the two. But he actually does confront the father in the trench run. He succeeds and then comes back changed. So a heroic journey hero doesn't need to succeed. Like Frodo doesn't succeed. But regardless, there's always the return having changed. So he technically doesn't return back to his home, but he returns from his adventure having learned that he actually has the Force, that there is this, he has this place in this war. And so that's the heroic journey in a nutshell. There's better versions of it. If you want like a speed run version of it, like the Cliff Notes version, Dan Harmon has a really good he calls it his plot circle, where he just takes a circle, divides it into 8 sections, then has a word for each of them, and those are the sections of the heroic journey. And every episode of Rick and Morty is set by that, because he's kind of lazy about that, but it's okay because it's still good.
And so in Star Wars, especially episode 4 to episode 5, there's that juxtaposition between in episode 4, the call to adventure is like, I don't know anything about anything, and now I'm going to go deal with this, and then I'm going to meet the goddess and do all this stuff and trench run, and now I'm awesome. Yep. Juxtaposed with, I am awesome and I don't know any of this, and I'm going to fail the trial of the tree, and then I'm going to lose my hand to my literal father, and then I'm going to come back and not feel too great about it.
Yeah.
And they're both this, like, you see like a literal mirror, the same character following the same path with drastically different outcomes. Yeah. And then the nice payoff resolution and eventual catharsis for different characters as well in the final movie. But the point to keep in mind here is these are not George Lucas did not invent the hero's journey for this movie. He took elements that I imagine a lot of other people at that point, and maybe you guys have some sense of how many other folks were probably pulling hero's journey.
It's in every movie almost ever.
Yeah, and there's and then also the concepts of cowboys and rocket men, things that are just familiar enough that if I told you about them, you would not have to stretch your imagination to understand what I was talking about. But just different enough that they keep you engaged and make you think, oh, but this sage, when he dies, he comes back as a Force ghost, and he's going to talk to me, and it's going to be kind of weird. I'm going to have to think about when he's actually talking to me, and when am I ever really alone? Then it'll become a dystopian nightmare about privacy. And we'll get into that on a later episode. But for now, that's exactly the kinds of things that I was hoping to talk to you about. It's seeing those beats play out. And maybe if you want, how much time we got left?
We got about 6 minutes.
Right.
So around 5, I'd say.
As we're kind of wrapping up, I love to keep these episodes on the shorter side. I think it'd be really fun if we gave a little taste of, since The Mandalorian, at this point, I imagine it'll have completed its run, because I always like to record these things ahead of time.
Hello, 2020?
Yes.
I assume?
This will be 2020.
Oh, okay then.
What do you think in terms of how the most recent installment that we're familiar with of Star Wars as a standalone thing, it leans real hard into the Western genre. How do you feel about The Mandalorian as an extension of this space fantasy, space Western work?
You want to go first?
Because I know you guys have been pumping out those episodes all about The Mandalorian, and it's been one of my favorite things to watch on your channel.
Oh, thank you.
I think that with The Mandalorian coming out, I feel that is the first, how can I say this? We punctured a hole in Disney's shield, right? Okay. In their shield of everything has to be the Disney way or the highway, right? And now we just released this semi-violent, Western movie, right? Something that we haven't seen in quite literal ages, right? We haven't seen something this close to a Western in a while. Good in a while. Sorry, let me correct that. And I think that I think it's a good move. The fact that I've said this before, you don't have to know everything about Star Wars for you to walk in on this, right? You can just come in with fresh eyes and still enjoy it. I think that it's beautifully done. I think Jon Favreau is doing really good at writing so far. But the only, I guess, how can I say this? The only problem that I really see with it is that due to its success, something else might come from it. You know, because money brings problems, and problems will bring their own set of things.
They bring hate. Hate leads to anger. Anger leads to suffering.
Yeah.
Yoda said it all.
the path to the Disney side of the Force.
Was there anything else you want to
No, that's it, really.
I mean, so far, the only episodes of The Mandalorian that have come out for us are episodes 1 through 4. And 1 through 3, really, really strong in their portrayal of this character. And showing the character as a Western gunslinger. And you see little tidbits of their past, and then you see them act out like what that would entail. So like a character like him having this quote unquote tortured past where like his family's taken from him, and he was a kid, and he doesn't like seeing defenseless kids or defenseless young things be suffering in any way. And so that basically informs so far everything that we've seen from him. And I think that as a Western, like as a character in a Western or a character as a samurai, works perfectly, because their protagonist is usually kind of overpowered a little bit in a way that they're very to themselves. They have a dark past. And on top of that, they're in some sort of insert environment here where that requires them to act on it. Like they need to come in and fix something. They need to come in and get rid of a bad person. And that's basically the formula that we've always seen in Westerns and in samurai movies, and applying that to this is perfect, because not only do we have a character who's not, by birth a Mandalorian, but by someone they have their past that we see, and those are things that we can empathize with. That we're like, I don't know what a Mandalorian. Are you kidding me? What the heck? And then so on the episode that we talk about on the Frameforge channel, I didn't know half the things you mentioned about Mandalorians, and that we are slowly fed that information over the episodes, and it works perfectly. That we have our heroic journey main character who's overcoming his trials and getting to the end, and I think that those two genres work perfectly for that archetype.
All right. Well, I can safely say that I think this is an amazing place to end season 1 of the Sweating the Small Stuff podcast.
Oh my God.
Thank you guys so much for Keon, thank you so much for all your contributions to all of the episodes. Alan, thanks for, always being a fan, listening. I'm going to just putting up a few more lives for you. But yeah, it's like, this is also the big reason I want to have you on, is like, where do we get to follow up with your awesome stuff? Because seriously, it's so fun getting to listen to your incredibly insightful takes on like what it takes not to just make like a cinematically beautiful film, but to make a film that people would want to watch, or a story that people want to see and hear. Yeah. Where do we find you?
Cool. Well, we have our YouTube channel, Frameforge, where we're constantly putting stuff out, and we're slowly rolling out the Facebook page and the Instagram page and all that kind of stuff. But mostly, we're really proud of what we're making with the YouTube channel, and that, it's really just our personalities coming out and talking about the things that the thing that is good about YouTube right now is that authenticity is big, and that like the VFX Artist React series is just the Corridor crew talking about stuff they already knew in a context people didn't already know. And for us, a lot of these things aren't, and it's not like we're genius I was going to say Nosferatu, I meant the other one, the Nostradamus. That like, these are just things that you understand after making a lot of things and understanding a little bit of the backbone of filmmaking. And it's good for us to talk about it. How about you, Kyle?
I think what we bring to the table really is just a nice, fun, simple environment where you can learn like about what your passion is. Filmmaking is not for everybody. It really isn't. But if you come and visit the channel, you can see two people that are clearly into it. And as we learn, we want to teach. And I think we may not be the best place to start. We might not be the best place to end. But we're on that journey with you, and we want to see it through.
And you'll find a friend.
I really like, as a person who's trying to do his own form of content creation, you guys have taught me all sorts of things really valuable about like the importance of empathy in telling a story. It doesn't matter what kind of story you're telling, and the importance of like everything down to the frames per second you show something in can make a huge difference. So, man, just
Gemini,
in case you don't see it, or I will make sure to have links in the show notes. I'll make sure to put links anywhere I can think of. But the Frame Forge YouTube channel, definitely check it out. Definitely check out Keon and Alan on all your social medias. And remember to subscribe and like and let us know what you think of Explain the Small Stuff. Let us know what you liked about season 1, what you would like to see us do differently as we move forward. And as always, I've been your personal brain trainer, Cameron Boozerjamari, reminding you, from movies to media to the world around us, it's details like these that make it worth sweating the small stuff.
Later.
Did I check the frame rate?
That was
at least?
good. Hopefully. We can't look like dinguses on this podcast.